Half Sword represents one of those projects that makes you stop and think about what it really means to develop a game with genuine passion in 2026. The decision by the Georgian studio Half Sword Games to delay the launch to January 30th, refusing the pressure to release before Christmas, demonstrates a maturity rarely seen in the current industry. When so many developers push out broken games to hit commercial windows, seeing a small team prioritize the player experience is almost comforting. Even if it means waiting an extra month after having already tasted the addictive demo, what is most impressive is how a studio of just 10 people scattered across the globe managed to create something so technically ambitious and mechanically deep. The team, led by developers from Georgia, with members in Argentina, Sweden, India, the Netherlands, and the United States, works independently but clearly shares a cohesive vision. There is no sense of design by committee that plagues so many AAA releases. Half Sword has personality. Despite being a historically accurate medieval combat simulator with 15th century weapons and armor, the partnership with HEMA, historical European martial arts, practitioners and real fencers to develop the combat system adds a layer of authenticity that goes far beyond the surface. It's not just pretty pre-programmed animations, you are actually controlling the sword with your mouse, feeling every clash of blades, every block, every thrust. The realistic damage model means a well-placed hit to the head can end any fight instantly, whether against a grunt or a boss, creating a constant tension that few medieval combat games achieve. The community that formed around the demo has been surprisingly engaged and patient, with players reporting over 10 hours of playtime in just 2 days and reacting positively to the launch delay. This speaks volumes about the quality of the game's core when players are happy about a delay because they trust the final product will be better. The developers have built something special. The subreddit is full of discussions about mechanics, combat tips, and theories about consciousness and blunt force damage, showing that there is real depth to be explored. The story of Half Sword, as the demo makes clear, is not a traditional campaign with a beginning, middle, and end. It is more of a pretext to throw you into a brutal circuit of combat and let you create your own narrative with every fight. In the demo, I felt the game wants you to see yourself as a total nobody. You enter as a commoner from the late 15th century, fragile and ill-equipped, and the sense of a career comes less from cutscenes and more from surviving long enough to move up a tier. Weapons, armor, opponents. And that's where, for me, the real plot lies. Social climbing through violence. The physics and gore end up becoming emergent narrative. When you win, it doesn't feel like mission accomplished. It feels like a happy accident. When you lose a limb in seconds, that's a plot twist you caused yourself by making a bad decision. This aligns with the stated idea of being an endless tournament, where victory only pushes you forward. I think this choice of having no fixed story is consistent with the studio's focus on authenticity and simulation because, in practice, Half Sword wants you to roleplay your character through the way you fight. Are you cautious and technical, or desperate and wild? The game tells you who you are in the most direct way possible, in the fight. And honestly, for a game that thrives on controlled chaos, I prefer a game that is direct, as it provides a sense of survival through competence. The gameplay is, above all, a physics simulation where you actually operate the body and the weapon, and this totally changes the feeling of playing. It's not a button-mashing hack and slash. It's almost a weird sport that you learn the hard way. In the demo, the first impact is the control, raising your guard, landing a punch, adjusting the reach of a strike. Everything feels clumsy on purpose, yet incredibly honest once it starts to click. The studio itself describes the experience as learn as you go, with very little hand-holding, and I felt exactly that. You get beaten up until your brain understands the basics. What I liked most is how every fight turns into a mini physics and timing puzzle, because armor and weapons aren't just skins, they are actual mechanics. When metal is involved, the game forces you to stop swinging like a madman and start looking for angles, gaps, impact, or to switch tools. A strike that would be deadly without armor becomes nothing. The violence isn't just aesthetic either. It communicates the state of the fight, since the proposal is less about an HP bar and more about trauma happening in a credible and often sudden way. In practice, this makes everything more tense, because a small mistake can end the run quickly, and that, for me, is where the game becomes addictive and cruel at the same time. The arena mode, the gauntlet in the demo, is the engine of the loop. You win, step up a tier, face more complicated fights, and the sense of progress comes more from your skill than from inflated stats. And I enjoy this because every victory feels earned with real sweat, not numbers, although I also understand those who find it frustrating because the game doesn't ask for permission to humiliate you. From what the developer has already said and shown, you can tell the focus is on maintaining authenticity. Late 15th century weapons and armor, HEMA inspiration, full simulation as a core mechanic. Personally, I think this is the soul of the game. It's weird at first, but when you get into the rhythm, the combat becomes a heavy, noisy, and very satisfying dance. My only reservation with the demo is that this philosophy of free control and total physics creates a very high entry barrier. You will fail a lot before feeling competent, and the game seems proud of that. If the early access on the 30th of January 2026 manages to expand the variety of arenas and situations without diluting this identity, Half-Sword has everything to become that type of game you play while laughing and suddenly get serious because you realize you are actually improving. The graphics, in my view, don't try to be pretty in the traditional cinematic way. They try to be raw and readable, to sell the impact, the weight, and the filth of a medieval tournament. In the demo, what pleased me most visually is the sensation of material. Metal looks like metal, leather looks like leather, and when you put on a more complete set of armor, you can understand why the studio talks so much about reflections, sounds, and presence. You feel bigger just by looking at it. I also like the contrast between the somewhat oddball characters, that mannequin look that is part of the game's identity, and the serious details of the historical gear. This mixture creates a unique style. It's not photorealism, it's physics realism plus late 15th century setting. The gore and blood effects are central to the aesthetic, and this directly influences how you perceive the graphics. The visuals are at the service of impact, not just spectacle. The demo itself lets you choose gore levels, which already shows the team treats this as a visual pillar and not just decoration. Regarding lighting and scenery, I felt the game shines best in simple spaces, dirt arenas, wood, mud, because the readability of combat remains clean, and the focus goes to movement and collisions. When the trailer and released materials show environments that are a bit more elaborate, you can see they want to expand the stage without losing that vibe of a hostile and functional place. Now, being quite honest, there are moments where the physicality makes everything look kind of comical, and this might give an ugly game impression to someone who just glances at a clip out of context. For me, this is more a consequence of the type of procedural animation and active ragdoll than a lack of visual polish. It's a style that you either buy into or you'll find janky. If the early access on the 30th of January 2026 arrives with a bit more performance, polish, and visual consistency without killing the game's charming weirdness, I think Half-Sword will be one of those cases where the graphics don't win you over with a screenshot, but win you over when you are inside, sweating, watching metal hit metal, and understanding every glint is part of the fight. The performance of Half-Sword in the demo for me is that typical hit or miss scenario of physics-heavy games. When it's smooth, you feel like you've struck gold, but when it stutters, it's incredibly enraging because it happens right at the most intense moment of the fight. In my time with the demo, I had very stable sections in simpler fights, and this matches reports of people running it on high settings and getting decent FPS while everything is under control in the arena. The problem is that as the chaos increases, the feeling is that the game starts to exact a tax for every extra thing happening at the same time. The big villain, from what became quite clear in the community, and I felt this in practice, is that the game is very CPU bound because of the physics simulation, so just having a strong graphics card isn't enough. When there are too many things to calculate bodies, collisions, dismemberment, blood, it can turn into a festival of stutters and frame drops, even on a good machine. And the blood and gore are almost a secret performance button. Lowering the effects usually helps for real, but it gives that feeling of I'm watering down the game's flavor. There is even a comment attributed to the studio's own profile stating that blood mechanics impact resources and that they are working on a performance patch, which at the very least shows it's not just my paranoia. One thing that bothers me more than low FPS is input lag in menus and when changing settings, because it gives the impression that the game is still technically a bit raw. At the same time, I also think there is a preset trap. At the start, I set it to cinematic, thinking it was the best, and later discovered that it isn't designed for fluid gameplay. So, part of the demo experience is almost learning to configure the game, lowering resolution, using DirectX 12 with care, adjusting gore, and testing until you reach the sweet spot. If you enjoyed the Half Sword demo and it already clicked for you regarding the physical combat, even if you got beaten up at first, I think early access tends to be worth it, but only if you go in with the mindset of a game under construction and a willingness to follow updates. It enters early access on the 30th of January 2026, and the page itself indicates the price may rise when early access ends, so buying early is usually the way to pay less and support development. In my reading, Half Sword is that type of game you buy for the system and the sensation of mastery, not for scripted content or infinite variety right off the bat. The proposal is a physics-based medieval combat simulator with 15th century weapons and armor, and that makes everything heavier, stranger, and, when it works, absurdly satisfying. On the other hand, I would wait without guilt if you are the type of person who wants a more well-rounded package. More modes, clearer progression, fewer rough edges, and less chance of becoming repetitive after the initial charm. Especially since the studio mentions staying in early access for 6 to 12 months, with updates bringing things like new maps and even more gore, meaning it is a period where the game will change a lot. The game is recommended for those who like physics sandboxes, testing weapons, reach, angles, impact, and laughing at funny situations during fights. It is also very much for those who enjoy explicit brutality, as the game's ecosystem itself flags frequent violence and gore and adult content, and this is in your face right from the demo. I would not recommend it, even less so in early access. For those who want the precise control of a traditional action game, those who get irritated by physics quirks, and those who don't have the patience to relearn movements until they feel natural. And also anyone sensitive to explicit violence. This isn't clean fantasy sword fighting. It's ugly hits, limp bodies, and the game makes zero effort to be discreet. I think I will buy it in early access if the price is honest, and if I'm in the mood to play in short sessions like 3 fights and some laughs. The promise of expansion, new maps, etc. excites me, but I would still treat it as a game to enjoy the development journey, not as a final release where I'm going to binge for 40 hours and be done. I like this sensation of learning a weird skill over time, but I would buy it with a very clear mental warning. There will be inconsistent phases, there will be updates that change the feeling, and I will be paying to get on this roller coaster early.
Hey, better get back.